peer review should be abolished. It's a pretty respected thing at this point that if you want to trust a piece of information, what do? Every good, responsible science person will say it. Hank Green says it all the time, right? All the sciencey people, you go and you find yourself a peer-reviewed journal, and you look at what the most objective meta-analyses of peer-reviewed journals say. No, peer review, we made that up at a certain point. Peer review has not always existed. And I'm getting this information from an article by a man named Adam Mastroianni, who is engaged in trying to start a new way of publishing scientific research. And his method comes from a lot of research into the peer review. He spent years trying to fix peer review and make it better, and he has basically given up. He's decided, nope, this system is too broken. We'd actually be better off just getting rid of it. So it's not even, hey, there's a replication crisis, science is in a bad place, but we can fix it. No, it is too broken to be fixed. I'm going to give you a summary of his article, The Rise and Fall of Peer Review. But for once, I'm going to actually strongly suggest that you read it yourself. Now, I know what you're thinking. Reading is hard. And I'm not going to tell you to do anything that's hard, because that never works. You can't just tell somebody who doesn't want to read, just do it anyway, and then they do it. It doesn't work. So instead, I'm going to tell you that what you can do is you can get this app Pocket. This is not an advertisement for them. I'm not paid by them. God, I wish I was. I should look into it because I love them. What they do is literally you can find any article anywhere, and when you have the app downloaded, you just push the little share button. Like you're gonna send it in a text message, you're gonna post it to Facebook or whatever. You push the little share button, and Pocket, add to Pocket, is just there. And then you push that button, and it's just in your pocket now. And then any article that's in your pocket can be read aloud to you by a robot voice, like an audiobook. And the robot voice is pretty solid compared to other applications I've used that turn things into robot voices. It's a bit more human. It doesn't stop at weird points or get confused by apostrophes. So download Pocket, and then look up The Rise and Fall of Peer Review by Adam Mastroianni. I'll have a link in the description, and just read it yourself, because there's a lot of good information in there. He really wastes no time. You know why? You know why he wastes no time? Because he's not going through some pretentious academic publisher. I'll get to that in a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself. I have 12 facts I've pulled from the article to share with you today about peer review. So, first of all, for most of history, there was no agreed upon standard for what got published in a scientific journal. It was only after World War II that the government really wanted to crack down on what it spent money on researching. So it funded only peer-reviewed journals to determine, what research they wanted to fund. And as a result of that, peer review exploded in popularity. A bunch of journals started making their research peer-reviewed because there was a financial incentive to use peer review, because that might mean that your research could be funded by the US government, which is a guarantor of funding that most research cannot get. Second of all, it's so new that it would be absolutely shocking to scientists of the past. Albert Einstein only had one study peer-reviewed in his whole time of publishing, and he was outraged. He wrote an angry letter to the journal, like, "What are you doing? Just let me publish my article." And let's see here. Yeah, so the main reason he wants to get rid of it is because of all of the bureaucracy and waste it produces. Scientists collectively spend 15,000 years reviewing papers every year. Now, that's what Adam says in the article. He says they collectively spend 15,000 years. That's a stupid thing to say. And this is kind of a separate hot take, but I'm just going to go into the separate hot take as a tangent. What the fuck does that mean? 15,000 years collectively? How are you asking a normal person to interpret that information? I don't know off the top of my head how many scientists there are on Earth. And is that the field he's talking about? Is he talking about all of the scientists on Earth? Who determined what was and was not a scientist for this data where it takes 15,000 years for all the scientists to do this? What is the science behind the numbers about how many scientists waste time doing peer review? It's a meaningless number. It would be more helpful to just tell you, like a human being, that it takes them a long time to do it, that it's annoying, that individual scientists who go through this process struggle because of the peer review process, that it wastes their time. That's really all you need to know. So, he has this statistic, 15,000 years collectively. Take that how you will. The point he's making is just it wastes a lot of time. And he could have just said that. So just hear that when he says that. It also wastes a ton of money. Universities pay millions for access to peer-reviewed journals, even though most of the research is government and taxpayer funded, and none of that money goes to the authors or the reviewers who actually do the work. So it's a middleman, basically. There is an obnoxious, well-funded middleman that stands to benefit from the ongoing existence of peer review, even as it is a detriment to science. If we wanted to treat peer review like a scientific experiment, this is one of the big themes in Adam Mastroianni's article, is that he's like, there is a science of science. That's actually what it's called when people do this kind of work. The science of science. It's where you do research into what the most effective methods for progressing research are. And in the science of science, we have discovered that peer review doesn't work. If peer review were an experiment, it would be a failed one. So we should expect to see it producing some kind of results at this point, given how long it's been adopted and by how many different journals it's been adopted. But in many different fields, research productivity is either flat or declining, and there's evidence that new ideas are failing to replace older ideas. So that's really where progress is. We're doing a lot of writing and a lot of publishing, but if you want to see scientific progress, your ideas have to change at least somewhat at some point. If new ideas aren't replacing older ones, no progress has actually happened. Yeah, so many of them don't replicate either, right? That's the replication crisis. If you know anything about the state of science right now, that's the first thing you'd know about, is the replication crisis, that a lot of this scientific research is more or less useless from a scientific perspective because no one has gone and done the experiment again and seen if it actually works a second time. Part of that is funding too, right? It's hard to get the funding to do an experiment even once, much less twice or a third time. And you're gonna get more money if you have some big attention grabbing like victory claim, rather than going back and like doing the painstaking work of being like, well, is this true? Somebody already said it's true, and we're just going to confirm, right? Next is most evidence shows peer reviewers consistently fail to catch even common, obvious methodological flaws in papers. So even the process is not working. Even if you believe that we should have peer reviewers doing this, they're not doing it. They're being handed articles and then they're skimming them. They're pretending to read them because it's part of their boring job. And then they're going, okay, yeah, it looks fine to me, whatever. And they're moving on with their day. Peer review can also encourage fraud. This is a big one. By causing researchers to try and send papers with results that will lead to reviewers agreeing with it, meaning that the preconceived biases of the peer reviewers hold back the publication process. There's an inherent status quo bias in having one person attempt to publish a potentially subversive idea and having 30 of their peers, usually not 30, having 10 of their peers go through and read it and see if they find something wrong with it. The more controversial an idea is, the more you would honestly expect someone to go, well, maybe there's something wrong with his data, you know? And so subversive ideas are held back constantly by this peer review process. It slows progress. Oh yeah, so Nobel laureate Sidney Brenner, if you want to hear from somebody who does the work themselves, once said, I don't believe in peer review because I think it's very distorted. And as I've said, it's simply a regression to the mean. I think peer review is hindering science. In fact, I think it has become a completely corrupt system. These are the actual researchers who do the work, admitting that they don't think this system is working, but they're just doing their best to deal with it and work within it. And this is also a big part of why there's so much pretentious, inaccessible literature, right? A lot of articles are boring and styleless because of peer review. Before peer review, papers were able to begin with things like, and this is a quote, "Help, a mysterious number is persecuting me." Right? That's exciting. You read that in the first line of that study and you're like, oh, okay, what is this about? And they were able to have style as long as they backed it up with data that was able to be reproduced. You can stylize it, you can have fun with it. Now papers begin with, this is a real quote, "Humans have been said at various times and places to exist, and even to have several qualities or dimensions or things that are true about them. But of course, this needs further study." This is a significant portion of the reason why I hate people just telling you to read more as a solution to the problem, as if the problem is that we're just not pushing our attention spans enough. Like, okay, maybe we have shortened attention spans and that's bad, okay? But there are two problems here. There are two problems because none of this stuff is made accessible. None of this information is being written in a way that is pragmatically useful to the average human being. In fact, they are quite deliberately setting up a system of review that makes it impossible to write something dopaminergically so that people will care and read it and learn. It's holding back the process of learning. Yeah, so the author then compares this status quo bias to the mentality that teenagers have of constantly worrying about, like, am I cool enough? Is this cool if I do this? Which, remember that for my next video, because there are some themes in all of my hot takes. There's some strings that tend to tie things together here. Oh yeah, and the biggest problem probably with maintaining peer review as a broken system, if you're absolutely sure, like, you really want to maintain peer review even though it has all of these flaws and problems, probably the biggest argument that's going to convince you that it's dangerous is that it reifies and it makes people trust more bad research if bad research makes it through this process, which it very easily can, because again, the peer reviewers aren't really reading it very well. That one study that says that vaccines cause autism, that claim that is now so widespread and widely ridiculed and debunked, that was in a peer-reviewed journal. It was published by a well-respected, widely read, peer-reviewed journal. That's why it became so big. And it was stayed published there for 12 years before it was removed. It wasn't until it became a big claim amongst the political anti-vaxxers and then was criticized by pro-vaccine people that the attention was on it enough for the journal to even notice at all that it was wrong the whole time. So let's take a step back from this hot take, because I've given you a lot of information all at once. I think this hot take can be placed almost on a sort of a political spectrum here, right? Where I think it's libertarian, basically, because the argument that I'm hearing here there's a lot of waste. Things are too slow. Things are too bureaucratic. These are themes within a lot of free market and libertarian thought. And the process needs to become faster, it needs to become freer, it needs to become more spontaneous and more open. Hypothetically, one can imagine a counterpoint to this political agenda. One can imagine a worldview in which it's not so much I'm blurry, but don't worry about that. I'm still here, baby. Uh, one can imagine a counterpoint that you might call like slow science. There is a book about slow science, but it's written about as pretentiously as most slow science is. I've read the entire thing. I have no idea what it's about. I read it. I slowed down. I reread paragraphs. I tried to take notes. No fucking clue what it's about. Um, there have been some attempts to actually place an agenda to the concept of slow science, which I think helped me clarify a little bit. Most of these are European authors. And when they try to place an agenda, it seems like mainly the concerns are the incentive structure of a sort of a capitalist society, and the attention economy, encouraging people to publish to the internet or to publish for attention, as opposed to publish within the university and within a setting of academic rigor. So I'm telling you this because I want you to be aware that there is a counter argument of sorts to what I'm saying, but it's very undeveloped. And I would love to see a more depthful critique of science as a system along these political lines, where you can see more depthfully the outlines of why somebody with a more libertarian disposition might want to abolish peer review, and why somebody with more of like an authoritarian socialisty sort of a disposition might want to slow things down and proceed with more caution. In general, though, I'm a fan of the Abolish peer review one because I think it's just very clearly true that the system is bureaucratic and that slows it down and that breaks it. So science is bullshit. Trust nothing. Trust nothing and no one. There is no science. You know nothing.